Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexea E.M., Administrative Assistant at Dance NYC. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a non-disabled, queer Black woman, artist, creator, and infinite being. I'm currently in my hometown of Queens, New York, on the land of the Lenape people. I am light-skinned with brown faux locks in a bob, and a lavender shirt, and my background is a deep purple wall. First, thank you for joining us for this digital experience and for being adaptable in these challenging times. As we are at the mercy of technology, we want to remind you that there may be delays, sound issues, and changing circumstances that may occur during our time together. We invite you to extend grace and patience to each other as we manage this virtual landscape. Second, ASL interpretation by Sarah Ann and Brandon Kazan Maddox from Elsie Interpreting Services, as well as closed captioning services provided by Cara Dugas of Viscardi Center, will be available throughout the entire event. At times, due to Zoom to Facebook streaming difficulties, the closed captioning service does not stream as accurately as we'd like to. Therefore, a live transcription will be available via Dance NYC stream to text link now pinned in your comment section. Third, please note that this session is being recorded and will be saved on our Facebook Live channel right in the video tab of the Dance NYC page under playlist entitled Artists as Necessary Workers, Facebook Live Conversation Series. These recordings will be also available with closed captioning on our YouTube channel after the series is over. Fourth, feel free to post in the comment section on Facebook with questions or comments you may have for the speakers. We will be gathering them throughout the duration of the conversation. We will present the most relevant questions that the time allow. Fifth, in the case we need to quickly end this session due to disruption, have no fear. You will hear us say abort 3 times and we'll end this session and we'll resume within 5 minutes right here on Facebook Live. Lastly, we hope you will help us to amplify these conversations. Hit the share arrow to share this live conversation directly to your page. Repost, tag us, and share your takeaways on Twitter at DanceNYC, on Instagram at dance.nyc, and Facebook at dance/NYC, using the hashtag Artists as Necessary Workers and Dance NYC Live. As we continue to host these conversations, this being our 9th, we are learning how to create dialogue spaces that reflect both our values as a team and organization, and the intention of the series is to dive deeper and hold space for the experiences of dance workers within our community. We're committed to hosting these conversations in as wide a format as possible, for example, using Facebook rather than only Zoom registration for participants. However, as these conversations continue to move through highly public spaces, we have felt it is important to articulate a series of community guidelines by which we hope to hold this space and invite our participants to honor them as we share space together. These guidelines are a living commitment and may grow and/or change to reflect our learning as a staff, organization, and in relationship to you, its participants and beneficiaries. If you have suggestions, additions, and/or feedback for these guidelines, or for any part of our programming, we invite you to share them via our post-event survey or via email at info@dancenyc. We ask that folks participating and/or benefiting from today's event via comments on Facebook follow these. First, upon participating in this event as a viewer or commenter, you are entering a virtual space of learning, reflection, respect, and accountability that is based on Dance NYC's values of justice, equity, and inclusion, which can be found on our website. This means that we agree to share our opinions, challenge perspectives, and engage or debate respectfully, and acknowledge and course correct if harm is caused. We honor everyone's personhood and humanity. We do not tolerate hate speech that is disparaging, abusive, violent, or that is intended to defame someone's character publicly. And lastly, if anyone acts in violation of these guidelines, they will either be warned and asked to course correct or removed depending on the severity of the action. We thank you for your collective agreement to these guidelines to ensure that our space remains generative for and respectful of our community. And now we'll begin touring in a post-COVID world, Artists as Our Necessary Workers Facebook Live conversation series. As a way of deepening our work and learning in racial justice, we regularly practice land acknowledgements at meetings and public convenings to recognize our country's violent history and its legacy in the space we occupy. This practice is currently under development with the guidance of Indigenous dance artist and activist Emily Johnson to ensure that we embody this allyship. This includes taking actionable steps towards reparations in this initial instance by nurturing relationships with local Indigenous and First Nations artists and organizations, and making pathways for Lenape artists and leaders to return to Lenapehoking today. I would like to acknowledge that the city of New York is on stolen land. More specifically, Lenapehoking, the unceded homeland of the Lenape people, who are also recognized federally as the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma and Adarko, Oklahoma, Delaware Tribe of Indians, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Stockbridge Muncie Community, Bowler, Wisconsin, and in Canada, Muncie, Delaware Nation, Moravian of the Thames First Nation, Delaware of Six Nations. The Lenape people are the original inhabitants and caretakers of this land and gave Manhattan Island its name, Mannahatta, meaning hilly island or place where we go to gather the wood for the bows. Additionally, as we are gathered digitally and inspired by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in what is currently called Canada, I invite us to consider the legacy of colonialization embedded with technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many rural Indigenous communities that at times leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to climate change that disproportionately impacts Indigenous communities worldwide. We acknowledge that changing these inequities are our shared responsibility, as are our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. We recognize that as an organization based in NYC, we have benefited and continue to benefit from the systemic displacement and subsequent erasure of Lenape people and the governance on their land. Please join me in taking a moment to recognize and reflect on the centuries of violence, displacement, forced migration, and settlement here, as well as the centuries of resilience and leadership of all Indigenous and First Nations peoples on Turtle Island that have led to our presence and livelihoods in New York City today. Continuing our practice of recognition, we would like to name openly the legacies of the African slave trade, migration and immigration patterns, the disability rights and disability justice movements, and LGBTQ+ fight for justice. These are areas and tactics of oppression through which white supremacy and settler colonialism have enacted and sustained its power over time. They are not only the only areas, but rather the main focuses of Dance NYC's ongoing historical acknowledgement practice and justice and equity and inclusion strategy. We would also like to take a moment of silence in remembrance of the victims of COVID-19 around the world and to honor the unseen labor of the many people that continue to ensure the safety and well-being of our community in these trying times, including but not limited to frontline workers. Lastly, and certainly not least, we acknowledge and mourn Raya Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, Justin Howell, Sean Monterosa, Jamel Floyd, Nina Pop, Tony McDade, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashard Brooks, David McAtee, and all Black people whose lives have been taken by the actions of white people, institutions, and systems, and the many accomplices, witnesses, and beneficiaries of white supremacy who have actively participated in or stood by and observed in silence. Over the past few weeks, we've also witnessed, as a nation and city, the palpable impacts that systemic racism has on the lives of Black and Indigenous people, peoples of color, immigrants, disabled and immunosuppressed people, LGBTQ+ people, people living in low-income communities and poverty impacted by COVID-19. White supremacy continuously manifests itself in violence at the hands of law enforcement and in interpersonal interactions, our government's response to COVID-19, and our cultural institutions. Let us take a final moment of silence. Thank you. For those of you who are new to the organization, Dance NYC delivers 5 core services for the field: advocacy, action-oriented research, leadership training and convening, technological resources through our website, and grant making, all to empower dance makers and cultural workers, build audiences, and strengthen the collective voice for the art form. Dance NYC works in alliance with the national organization Dance USA to drive local national synergies in dance service delivery. You can learn more about our programs at our website, dance.nyc. On May 14th, Dance NYC launched a campaign declaring loudly that artists are necessary workers. This campaign, which will run through early August, demands the acknowledgement, representation, and integration of dance and art workers in the decision-making that will envision our future post-pandemic. Artists serve New York City at every level, leading tourism, strengthening education, fueling the economy, and ensuring our health, wellness, and imaginations. So far, Dance NYC has released the Artists Are Necessary Workers campaign video featuring members of our dance community displaying our strength and power in numbers. We have written a letter and are now working with the Mayor's Office of New York City to insist on dance having a seat at the table. And lastly, we have curated this series of public conversations with arts workers to discuss challenges, offer considerations, and envision our way forward as a field. Our conversation today will focus on arts administrators and organizers working tirelessly through this moment. I'll turn it over to our moderator, Manager of Justice, Equity, and Inclusion, Candace Thompson-Zachary, to lead us in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexia, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you everyone who's tuning in today. As she said, I'm Candace Thompson-Zachary. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am calling in from the land of the Lenape and Canarsie people in what is currently known as Brooklyn, New York. I'm a non-disabled Black woman of Caribbean heritage. I'm wearing a black Dance NYC shirt, dangly earrings. I am brown-skinned with an auburn afro, and my background is a red wall with books and shelves. So again, thanks for joining us for this conversation today that will be on touring and its role in our world of dance making and presenting. So of course, as we speak now, most touring engagements have come to a screeching halt. Companies that relied on this model of earned income and reaching their communities are now in a state of stasis, probably self-preservation and reevaluation. So as we've mentioned in previous conversations, this has brought on the reconsideration, this moment has brought on the reconsideration of many of the practices that were previously considered inextricable from our economy of performance presentation. So our main questions today relate to what are artists doing that relied on touring for their livelihoods? How are they thinking about their practice? How are venues responding or redirecting their operations? And finally, how are arts workers, producers, agents, etc., who support this economy also shifting? As we dive into this conversation, I also wanted to think about touring from other perspectives. So, before this moment of COVID, Dance NYC qualitative data shows that touring economies were not as lucrative as they were previously. Many companies subsidize their touring budgets with other forms of income. And additionally, from my own experiences as an artist, it seems that the touring circuit itself is this closed network of privileged relationships. So many have also reflected that touring models at times reinforce colonial patterns of swooping into communities with preordained notions of virtuosity and aesthetics, and not to mention the carbon footprint that touring also requires. So we're looking at both the necessity and the role that it plays in our art ecology, but also maybe some of the downsides to the way that touring is currently set up. So for this conversation, I'd like to be able to look both towards current responses to the shifting possibilities of touring, and then also look towards the future of what these engagements could be. So I'm happy to welcome our guests today. We have with us Anna Glass, Laura Colby, Lane Czaplinski, and Marjani Forté-Saunders, who are respectively EDs of companies, artist agents, performing arts directors, and artist choreographers. So yeah, we almost have everyone here. Laura, I think we're just waiting for your video to come on. There we go. Great. Thanks so much for joining me, folks. So I think if we could just go around and do our introductions, just a brief one so that everybody knows who's in the room. And then we can kind of dive deeper into what you do and who you are and what your life is like. Anna, you want to begin?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Glass. I'm the Executive Director of Dance Theater of Harlem. My pronouns are she, hers. I am a non-disabled, light-skinned African-American woman. I'm wearing a black blouse situated today on the land of the Potawatomi people here in Michigan. I am sitting right now on a gray couch. Behind me, situated between two blue lamps and a light blue wall and a floral arrangement, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for joining us. Lane, you want to go? I think you're still muted, Lane.
I was so ready. Hello, my name is Lane Czaplinski. My pronouns are he, him. I'm calling in from what is commonly known as Columbus, Ohio, which is on the land of the Lenape, Miami, Shawnee, Hopewell, and Wyandotte people. I am a non-disabled 50-year-old white man of Ukrainian heritage. I am wearing a black polo, have longish gray hair, and I'm wearing glasses. And I'm sitting in front of a white wall with a lone portrait of Tina Bausch.
Thanks for that, Lane. Marjani?
Hey everybody, I'm Marjani Forté-Saunders. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am coming to y'all from the land of the Hahamonga people, which is also of the Tonga people, the Tonga tribe, also commonly known as Pasadena, California, all the way on the West Coast. I am wearing a Ghanaian multicolored jumpsuit and yellow dangle earrings. I am an African-American woman.
Thank you. Laura.
Hi there, Laura Colby. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am sitting on the land of the Ohlone people, currently known as Berkeley, California. This is where I've been since my last flight on March 14th. Otherwise, you would usually find me on the land of the Lenape. I identify as a non-disabled white woman of European heritage with blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm in a large room with a cabinet with glass doors behind me.
Cool. Thank you, Laura, and thank you everybody for describing yourself and sharing who you are with us. So before we dive into like the meat of the conversation, I think we could just go around and talk more about yourself, about your work, maybe your organization, if that's what you do. And yeah, I think just like deep introduction so we get a sense of who you are and how you operate. Anybody wants to go first?
I'll go.
Great, awesome.
Jump in. So as I shared, I'm the Executive Director of Dance Theater of Harlem. We are a 51-year-old institution founded by the legendary Arthur Mitchell. We were founded out of tragedy. The assassination of Dr. King inspired Arthur Mitchell to create Dance Theater of Harlem with the intention of doing two things. One, dispelling the myth that Black people did not have the acumen or skill to do ballet, but then also with the intention of setting forth the belief that ballet belongs to everyone. And so this is an institution that has been firmly rooted in its social justice mission, also being rooted in this beautiful art form of ballet. I have always been affiliated with dance institutions, having worked as a booking agent for many years, representing the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company. Then moved over to the presenter side, working as managing director of 651 Arts. I've had a long career as a freelance producer as well before going to Dance Theater of Harlem, but have a personal love for the art form as a former dancer myself, and raising a 7-year-old dancer as well. And that's really a bit about me.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and thanks for what DCH, has done and what they mean for us in New York and for the larger dance community.
Thank you.
Lane, you want to take it?
You bet. I, for the last 3 years, have been at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm the director of performing arts. The Wexner Center is a non-collecting institution, Kunsthalle style, multidisciplinary venue with a film video program, exhibitions, a robust education department, public programs. Before that, I was the artistic director of On the Boards in Seattle for 15 years, and where, among other things, we started a program called On the Boards TV, where we document projects with multi-camera shots and split profits with artists and distribute those. I think there are currently 105 universities or so that subscribe to that service and teach those projects in their classrooms.
Wow. Yeah.
And another thing was working very closely with particularly the Northwest artistic community to produce new projects. Something that I learned a lot from. And before that, I was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And this September marks 26 years that I've actually been an arts administrator. And it has me at this point thinking a lot about what next generation leadership looks like and how I invest in that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you were in New York and then kind of left and did other things. Okay, nice. Marjani?
Right. So again, I'm Marjani Forté-Saunders. I am cheesing because I'm so excited and honored to be here.
Yeah.
I am a choreographer and performer, but I'm also one half of the collective, a sound and movement collective. We call ourselves 7 Names, and that is the work of myself and composer Everett Saunders. We call ourselves experimenters in Black radical performance. And that is really at the heart of what we do. But we're also co-founders of an emerging platform. For the past 3 to 4 years, we've been organizing both here in a local community of families and artists in Pasadena, California, but also within our larger network around the country to create Art and Power, which is committed to Black wellness and innovation. Enacting that work through the transformative intersections of art, science, spirituality, and culture. And so that's really picking up on the legacy of work that we stand on, which includes a long history in urban bushwoman, a long history and current practice in the work of the People's Institute for Survival and beyond. And that list really goes extraordinarily long. So again, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Marjani. And I think I first met you maybe 10 years ago. It might be more. Yeah, I took your class. I think I was trying to take Samantha's peace class, and you were subbing for her that day. So I think that was the first time I met you at DNA, when it was still DNA. Yeah. So thank you for that. And then you are bi-coastal, okay.
Right, we've been based here in Pasadena since COVID-19 shut down, so this is where we've been doing our stay-at-home thing. now also based in Bed-Stuy, which is our home community in Brooklyn.
Great. Thank you. Laura?
Hi. I'm a no longer practicing classically trained modern dancer, performed well into my 40s. I've been working as an arts administrator for the last 30 years, and I'm the founder and president of Elsie Management, which is an artist management company based in Brooklyn that is now in its 25th year. Through Elsie, I represent independent artists and touring companies in the genres of contemporary dance, contemporary theater, circus, and outdoor spectacle. And most recently, I've been very involved with creating New Futures, which a group of colleagues based in New York, Philly, Minneapolis, and we have been taking a look at what a radical reimagining of the performing arts world could mean. And entered in phase 2.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope we get to talk, we get there in the conversation today.
Me too.
Yeah, so, thank you for those deeper introductions so that the people who are watching can know a bit about you if this is their first experience with hearing you speak or knowing about your work. But I think we should just talk about, what has this halt in in-person programming done for your work, for your practice, for your organization. And I'm assuming that, touring is a big part of your either practice as an artist or the programming that your organization leads, the work you do as an agent. So I think it would be great to hear from each of your perspectives, what has this pause meant? And how are you thinking about it or shifting how you operate? So I think, yes, go when you're ready, when the spirit moves you.
So I'll start again for the moment. We were actually, the company was actually on stage in Detroit when the shutdown was happening. We were just finishing up a lecture demonstration for students. We had a 4 event engagement with the Detroit Opera House and had just finished the first aspect of our engagement. And when the company came off stage, we had gotten word that the state of Michigan was starting to shut down, and shortly thereafter, New York was shutting down. And so we had to quickly get the company back to the city. It was from a financial standpoint, it was a massive hit for us. We were just entering into the spring portion of our touring. And so all of those dates, ultimately, it took a while, I have to say. I'd be curious from Laura's perspective, what she was seeing, but it really took a while for many of our colleagues to really make the decision to recognize that we were going into this world and that we were going to have to either have conversations about cancellation or rescheduling. It was a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, honestly, because, there were signed contracts and, no one wanting to be in breach of contract. And so fortunately, finally, by the time, things were starting to move, the executive order came down from Cuomo that really sort of gave us the out to back out of these engagements, not really knowing how long it was going to take. And so, we had engagements that were happening in May, we're sitting in March, and I think people really thought that May was a possibility.
Yeah.
I didn't think that at all. And so, now, I think to the point that Laura is, hopefully we'll talk more about, we have moved all of our touring for the most part out of the fall. That took some effort. I was really surprised that there were people that really wanted to still have conversations about activity happening in the fall. So we've pushed everything into 21, and I think, you know, there's another round of conversations that need to happen about pushing even further into 21. But I also am really interested in sort of looking at this touring model, and is there another way that we should be approaching this? What is the relationship between, you know, this, assuming that we are able to figure out how to even rehearse, which is, you know, the hurdle that still hasn't been figured out yet. Assuming that that gets figured out, what I'm really curious about is there something to be learned from these digital platforms, particularly in communities that may not be able to afford companies like Dance Theater of Harlem? Are there other ways that we should be looking at what does it mean to bring art to communities? And I'm not saying not do live performance, because I'm a huge proponent of live and in person. I don't think that that should ever go away. But I do think that one of the things that we're seeing at Dance Theater is that COVID has just been the big reset button on all aspects of our business model that just didn't really ever work. And so I think it's imperative that we take a look at these models, really ask ourselves, what are the aspects of them that are working and not working? And are there other ways that we can accomplish something similar, if not the same thing, approaching it very differently? So, you know, we are investigating that from a touring place. You know, everything is sort of up in the air, to be honest with you. And I don't know if we really know what it looks like or when it will look like, what it needs to look like. But we do know that we're heavily linked to the income. We're heavily connected to the income. And so finding ways in which we can still earn income and perhaps not necessarily be putting ourselves in harm's way, or you know, maybe there's other ways to approach it, are things that we're investigating.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's, I mean, quite a story to like have the orders come down while you're on stage at a lecture in another state. But yeah, you bring up so many things that people are considering, that you know, all of us are considering. It's like, how do we navigate the contract? How do we keep our dancers safe? How do we still make payroll? How do we, you know, where will we find this new money from? So I think that the fact that you're using this time as a reflection, a time to reflect and see what new things are possible, is something that a lot of people are can relate to.
I'm thinking that, oh, Laura, were you about to say something?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I think I was going to drop in as an artist and a maker in a smaller way, working in a micro scale. I'm hearing you so much, Anna, speak to how this is impacting the larger company model, which, you know, blows my mind. But as a family of artists who had touring lined up, with, you know, Everett touring with Jamil Kasako, you know, across Europe, and then us and Seven Names incubating a new project over 2020. I think our entire income faced you know, a possibility of like utter dearth. And I think as we were emerging and chewing on these ideas with Art and Power about how we were going to show up in a really local way, and also support artists of like mind who were innovating across the nation and be in that kind of conversation, we started looking at how our work, one of the things, let me start off, is that we remembered is that artists are at the forefront of revolutionary movements historically. So we had to remember, like, oh wait, if we get back to the digging place, and if we dig and reconnect to our community of artists and thinkers and innovators across sector, then we may remember that while we don't necessarily have answers to address COVID-19, what we can do is look at our processes and look at how we can communicate those processes to work in partnership with our field to keep the work happening. I think that really became like the conversation that we were having with our partners, both as Seven Names and with our conversation as an emerging platform with Art Empowers. How do we keep the work happening? Because also what we know historically, Candace, is that the creativity is going to happen. It don't matter if the building, like just like the Bronx showed us when it came to hip hop, it don't matter if the building is burning down, we're gonna make the art. That's something that's going to happen no matter what. So then how do we get in conversations with these systems and institutions that actually have historically disenfranchised us and help them rethink, both from a creative and a more humane place, how to dig in? And so that's really been like the conversations that we've been having in several different ways, some of that emerging in the form of satellite residencies that I'm sure we can speak more to later, but that's part of how we were looking at it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marjani. It's like basically remembering who you are, remembering what your purpose is. Like at the root of it, what do we do?
That's what we do. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'll pipe in. Elsie Management is comprised of three: myself, our Vice President, Ana Amade, and our contract manager, Jimena Alviar. We work as a team and proudly represent right now 20 artists and companies. We had several companies out on the road. Our cancellations actually started as early as February because one of the companies that was incoming was one of our Italian companies. And the state that they were meant to be performing in had issued no Italians allowed to enter. And because Italy was one of the first hotspots on the globe, right? So that was the beginning for us. And by March 14th, everything basically ground to a halt. To Anna's point, I mean, we live in a country of 50 states with zero federal direction on this situation. And it is a mess. I would swear if I was allowed to, but I won't. So it's, I mean, it is incredibly frustrating because, again, back to Anna's point, every single contract, every single engagement, we don't want to be in breach. So someone has to invoke force majeure to cancel the date. We are so accustomed to force majeure events being a 24-hour, 48-hour, maybe a week long, but not this never-ending thing. And so what blew my mind is people were even asking, is it force majeure? Well, of course it's force majeure. This is totally and completely out of our control. So yes, there were closures came in the oddest ways. And yes, we all thought, oh, maybe it'll be over in 6 weeks. So, or 6 months even. So what were spring cancellations got moved into the summer, or maybe some got moved into fall of 20. And now, of course, fall of 20 has disappeared. And now we're all looking into winter of 21. And so for us, what it has meant for us is that our artists, all that lined up work is gone. We earn our income based on their engagements, so we have no income in sight. As a small business, we were able to get a PPP loan, but all that money is a Band-Aid. It will all be used up in a couple of weeks, and we will inevitably, as a team, all go on unemployment, and we'll limp along until we can start having engagements again, and our artists will start earning money again. But it's daunting. We are all mourning the loss of live performance. Our industry was the first to close. It will be the last to reopen. We are definitely looking to online content, and I know we'll talk more about that. I have been working with outdoor performances for years, and so I have a lot of hope for the outdoor platform, way beyond the band stage, So installations, street performances. There's just we do have the great outdoors when the weather's cooperating. But I think we are in this for the long haul. This is not going to be fixed. And I know we're all looking to the vaccine, and that's great, but then we have a compliance issue. So it's a very hard moment on our industry.
Yeah. Then that's really all there is to say. I think we're at a point now where, you know, and I think, yeah, like what Anna said, in the beginning, we were all like, well, maybe this will be over in a few 2 to 3 months. But I think we're all at that point now where everybody's like, oh, crap, this is not ending anytime soon. So it's like we're all, or at least what I'm noticing is that we're all trying to wrap our minds around the fact that this is something we're going to have to contend with for a long time. And what does it mean to be out of like business as usual for an indefinite period of time? So, yeah.
Yeah, with regard to COVID, I mean, when that showed up, you know, my first concern and really only concern was trying to figure out how to get people paid. And being within a huge institution, you know, I was freaked out about what the prospects of that were going to be. Luckily, we were able to jump on that and work with some really good people, both within the institution and also just in university in general, who were able to work really hard to make sure that not just contracts got paid out, but that commissionings, fellowships, and all of that happened. You know, but you know, these other pandemics that have gone on much longer, systemic racism and environmental ruin and all of that comes to a head. So then it's not just about how we're contracting artists or how we're figuring out the next, you know, scope of work. It's really about how we're having difficult conversations within our institutions to change all of this, and how to hold space and how to listen and really fundamentally slow down and ask that question. I think that you're asking is if the touring, in this case, the touring ecology or system, if that needs to change, because it's also a system that taps into other systems that are highly problematic. So, you know, it's interesting seeing Biden announce an environmental platform, but it's really tied to, you can't unpack these things from the other. And I think that that's the opportunity for all of us to rethink all of the work that we're doing, because we've gotten it wrong. And, you know, I'm really aware of the privilege and power that I've occupied for, you know, going on 26 years. And I really was struck by the article that was in the paper about Nick Cave, the artist. And he talked about the idea of looking in the mirror and coming to terms with what you've done and what you haven't done. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And that's when I talk about next generation leadership, I guess I'm just really trying to think about how we can do this differently and how we can help other people do it differently.
Yeah. So you're in that kind of reconsidering everything, and looking. Well,
yeah, you know, and luckily, you know, this wasn't the beginning of any of that. But I guess something I've been thinking about also is, I think it maybe comes down to a matter of urgency. On one hand, I've been thinking about urgency versus sort of a dutiful action. And when you're acting dutifully, you are walking, you know, you're going through your life at a normal pace. When you're acting with urgency, you're putting everything possible that you can into something, because if you don't, you understand how dire things are. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've been holding that up for myself and thinking about those two things, and what does that look like? How do you act with more urgency? So, you know, I can point to people I'm working with or steps I've taken or things that we've been doing for a long time, but I think it maybe comes down to that urgency question.
Right. How fast were we moving with those things? Go, Anna.
I was just going to say, I agree with what Lane is saying. I think that the challenge, though, that we're facing is that in the same way that there hasn't been a federal response to COVID, I don't think that there's been a collective conversation yet in our field about how we want to approach this. And so there are entities, presenters, artists, agents that are saying the things that you're saying, Lane, and are engaging in the world in that particular way. And then the flip side of it is that then you get requests for marketing materials for your brochure. And it's like, okay, wait, what's happening right now? where are we in this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just this disconnect that's happening because, you know, there's that, and then there's the other side of it for and I would say with my DTH hat on, the economics of this is also playing. There's this tension, because I equally want to just say, let's pause here. Can we just all decide this season, it's not happening. We're all going to take our hits. We're going to advocate for as much as possible for us to financially weather this at the federal level. Let's all sort of collectively put our energy for more PPP so that we can make it through. However, in these next 12 months, this is what we're going to do. We're going to figure out this system because the system doesn't work. It hasn't worked forever. And that's what we're going to focus our attention on. We've got this like push-pull happening where we kind of want to be in these conversations about the future. And yet at the same time, I'm expecting you guys to be here in February. And I'm like, wait, I can't figure out which one to be responsive to. And so, you know, I think that these conversations are great, and I'm really happy that they're happening. And I know, Laura, that you've been really actively involved in these conversations about the future. And I would love to see more of that. I think that there are all these conversations happening. You know, there's the Culture at 3 conversation in New York City, and I think San Francisco has their conversation, and Washington, D.C. has their conversation, and we're all having the same conversation. We may be approaching it differently, but we're not sharing information. And so there's all this cacophony happening, and I'm not seeing that we're sort of on this singular path together. We may all be coming at it from different places, and we all may have information to input, but I feel like we're gonna, these 12 months or 24 months or however long, they're gonna go by like this, and we will have not accomplished anything.
Yeah.
We'll just have been looking at one another, you know, having these brilliant conversations, and yet we'll then fall back into an old model that just didn't work to begin with. And so, you know, I don't know, Laura, if you're able to share a little bit about the work that you have been doing and what you sort of see from your perspective as it relates to this conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. The Creating New Futures effort with the colleagues across Philly, Chicago, I neglected to mention Minneapolis and New York City. I did post the website on the chat.
We'll post it.
I'll do it again, but so there is that conversation, Anna, and I also serve on the board of our national service organization, APAP, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. They are starting to convene groups around very specific topics. My contribution to the Creating New Futures document was very specifically around contracts and force majeure, and there actually is a lot of very concrete things happening. There are new clauses being passed around the industry representing the COVID pandemic moment. There is discussion of changing language, simple steps like not using the word deposit, but say payment instead, acknowledging that the artist's work, that the 48 months of work that goes into making whatever is they're bringing to you, that work needs to be paid for, and not on the date of the engagement, but preferably on the way. And no, it's not refundable. No matter what happens. So I have faith, Anna. It's a big country, and I have faith that in 12 months, we will by that time somehow manage to convene. We are a big country. We are not the size of France. We don't work that quickly and that efficiently. So I think it looks a bit like a motley mess right now, but frankly, that's our process, always has been. And I think that we will be able to convene nationally. I think it is so important to remember the strength of our industry. The performing arts contributes over $700 billion to the US economy. That is more than agriculture. It is more than transportation. We employ nearly 5 million arts workers. We export more than we import. we have to, you know, we have to scream this at the top of our lungs. We are not just, you know, we have some serious muscle, and we're not open now. We have to, you know, we have to do this. There are movements in New York, the DANC, the wage folks. You know, I think that we're at a moment of a lot of conversations, and I do have faith that it will coalesce into effective change.
Thank you. Thanks for all that you shared, Laura. I think what I'm hearing from, I'm pulling a few strands together, but this idea of, like Lane's idea of urgency versus beautiful action, and then like Anna's call for us to collectively decide that this is a moment where we need to stop. Like, we don't need the marketing material. Can you tell me what your anti-racism clause is? Like, you know what I mean? That this is a moment where we need to agree on what is important, I guess, what we should be focusing on. And with the work that you're also doing with Creating New Futures, Laura, I'm just thinking about, I guess, how does our dreaming for the future appear today, appear in the present, right? Like, how do we make that more visible or more active somehow, and not put it off to some like unseen, unknown destination? Like, how do we make it appear in our present? On that thought, though, I'm gonna pause and read some of the comments that are coming in on Facebook. I just want to shout out a few people who are active in the comments: Michelle Fletcher, Nikki Paraiso, Elka Samuel Smith, Eva Ya Santewa. Michelle Fletcher gave a few comments. I'll read the last one: urgency that is not reactionary, urgency that is mindful, urgency that is sustainable within the slower burning change. Yeah. Thank you for that, Michelle. She also shared, we need PUA extended and further relief funding for all arts workers, not just performers. Yep, exactly. The fact that we all play different roles in the ecology. And then Heather Robles, who's also on our team, responded to Michelle saying, we can move with alacrity while also being thoughtful. The speed of action is both responsible and necessary in our responding as a field to these times. Yeah. And the last thing that I'll just add to what's been shared is, I mean, that's part of why we have this campaign, Artists Are Necessary Workers. It's this idea of reinforcing that what we do, each of our individual roles within the arts ecology, the agents, the dancers, the photographers, the videographers, the choreographers, the performers, all do labor that is worth compensating, worth acknowledging, worth recognizing, and in these small ways that it appears, like in our contracts as a deposit versus a payment, right? It's like acknowledging that at each stage of our commitment, we're doing work that should be remunerated. Any thoughts or comments on I might shift us?
Yeah.
Marjani.
Well, I think the first thing in response to Lane's comment around, you said urgency and thoughtfulness, and it made me think a little bit, Lane, if you don't mind me bringing up your athletic history as a performer, as someone who has that sort of relationship to athleticism and can understand sort of figuratively this relationship to push and pull, or this relationship to endurance. Right now, one of the pandemics that you bring up that we are also wrestling with, and that is equally killing people, killing American people, is our issue with systemic racism. And it has been that way, right, for generations. And so what we have a tremendous opportunity, what I've been saying outside my house or on Instagram is like, COVID-19, the great equalizer. I've been saying this because what it's made us all do is stop and then deal with the things that are going to reemerge to be at both our human deficit, whether we get over COVID-19 or not. And to me, what that requires is a marathon-like movement where sometimes you're pushing, you're running, and you're responding with urgency in the way that you described, and where sometimes you're walking, as you were saying, Anna, mindfully, as you were saying, Laura, mindfully. And so then that makes me think about who's really good at that. Artists. We are incredible at that. We hurry up and pull the grant together and the project proposal. We make the phone calls, we gather the resources, we put together the proposal, we get it forward, and then we take our time and chip away and make that thing manifest. Artists are really good, I know, and I come out of a lineage of artists who are really good at this pacing. And so artist-led movements, what I love about both Creating New Futures, about Jumatatu Post study sessions, about all of the work I've been seeing with Winston Dynamite and folks out of New Orleans, Junebug Productions, God, and then it just keeps going on and on. What I've seen both online, on Instagram, and in these relationships are these innovative approaches to these practices that are amoebic, that aren't on a single road, that aren't telling us this is the single direction that we're all gonna go, but are putting forth the possibilities. What I'm proposing to the field is what it's gonna require from our administrators, from our organizations, is risk. That's where urgency is going to come. It's for us, it's for our field to say, artists, not just what do you think, but how do I invest in this vision? How do I invest in this collective action rather than the tokenization that exhausts us and perpetuates these cycles? How do I invest in the thinking that is coming out of these creative beings who have made a profession at doing that and who have made a profession of being cross-sector in our visioning, so that we can come out of this new and better?
Yeah, I think what Marjani beautifully describes there is a much more expansive picture of the work that artists can do. And too often, I think when we talk about touring, we get down to the idea of a performative deliverable, you know, the one show, the one night in a large space, or the 4 Thursday through Sunday run. And it way simplifies what artists do. And I think that this moment is making us, I think the opportunity we have is to better articulate in the way that Marjani just did, the kind of roles that artists can play within our institutions, within our communities. And the risk maybe is to define that and go ahead and contract behind it, sign artists up for longer periods of time.
I think that's right. I see, Laura, you want to say something. You go ahead. You sure? No, go.
Well, I was just going to say one of the contractual solutions of one of our clients came up with was that she took her typical engagement structure lane and she said, you know what? Let's make it a 2-season commitment. Let's make it a 2-part engagement. I'm going to do this virtual part right now, kind of a teaser. I'm going to come back in a year and I'll be there live. And this is this involves local dancers, it's community oriented, you know, it's a huge project. It's not just show up, lights and tights, perform, go home. It's a community engagement anyway. It's a residency engagement anyway. Well, what on earth do you do with a residency engagement in the middle of a pandemic crisis, you know, shutdown? So she crafted it, part 1, part 2. I love that 2-season commitment. I love it. And for me, contractually, I've just had to amend those agreements. Or I'm starting fresh with a brand new venue who says, yes, I want some of that because I want that artist. The only way that artist can be present for my community right now is through a screen. Okay, I'll book them that way and I'll bring them back in a year live. I love that. One of the other examples that's happening a lot in the music industry is the drive-in situation. I never thought in a million years I would have a drive-in engagement. I actually have a drive-in engagement for one of my contemporary theater companies because the venue is going to show a full-length recording of the film and then they're going to have live musicians performing music and the audience will be in cars. Never, come on. If you'd told me that a year ago, I would have said you're kidding. So there are ways to bring the artist present and to make it a more embedded engagement. And we do definitely have an opportunity here to do our jobs better And I think the data coming from the canceled engagements from the spring through now, that have the engagements that have been refigured for the screen, they are showing that other new audiences that will never buy a ticket to ever walk into our theaters, they are showing up. They're showing up from their living rooms, and that's fantastic. And we need to do a great job to keep those people engaged a year and 2 and 3 from now, so that maybe they do come to the theater, or maybe we have this hybrid engagement where you are performing live, but the venue is still able to offer a live stream, so that those audiences, for whatever reason, will never buy a ticket. They'll be able to experience this incredible work. So we have a new opportunity here that we need to make the best of.
I think we're already sort of answering this, and Marjani directly answered the question in terms of what are the new frameworks or leading principles that are coming to you because of having to deal with COVID, because of having to deal with the onslaught of racial violence, and this huge overhaul and call for equity in the arts. Like what, like for instance, Marjani shared that basically like what she's asking people, offering to people is to lead with risk, right? To take a chance, to try new things, to rely on artists to lead you into a process, because that's what they are well positioned to do. So, and Elaine, you started talking about this a little bit more, but I just want to make sure that we're explicit in talking about that.
Yeah, well, before the pandemics or the most recent iterations, Jamil Alawale Kosoko is a fellow for us. And, I'm aware of the kind of symbolic capital, as my boss says, that can go along with working with an artist like Jamil. And so I think the way that you have to make that meaningful is you have to supersize it, and you really have to figure out how you're lining up behind an artist and having that artist lead your institution and essentially change your institution. And so, and that was happening before, but then it allowed us to, because of that, then it allowed us to play right into the necessity of having to do online programming, because Jamil was already making work that he wanted to sort of decenter the Black body and the portrayal of Black pain from the middle of a performance, because it was really taking a lot out of him. So he conceptualized the performance differently, this new round of performance. And so it really lends itself to being an online kind of proposition. We were already talking about Jamil as a curator, Jamil setting up future performance platforms. So, for me, that kind of investment's the kind of investment that can change your institution, who's a part of it, who's represented in it, who's making decisions. Jamil and another artist held space for POC members of our community, exclusively for POC members of our community a few weeks ago. Those were leaders in our community, other artists, to really get together and just spend some time. And I think that these kinds of efforts, along with others, are the kinds of things, to Anna's point, hearing value statements from somebody like me is annoying at some point, because it's like, what are you actually doing to change this? And I think the thing that I've always struggled with in our field is what those collective conversations look like. Because, frankly, when I'm around them, I have existential crises, because I think that these systems have never worked. This notion of touring has never worked. And I've always felt like I've had to differentiate from it. Especially being a producer of contemporary work, new work by artists who largely, in many cases, don't have touring backgrounds, or it's really hard for them to tour. And so figuring out support mechanisms for artists in that way is a different proposition. So I've never known how to collectively organize in our field. All I've known how to do is go back and try and be as bold as possible within the institutional framework from which I'm working.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I'm hearing is basically because of the already deep relationship that you had with an artist like Jamil allowed you to deepen that relationship even further and allow them to leave. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like a new relation that you were trying to start in response to what's happening. It's leveraging, or not, I shouldn't say leverage, because that has like a negative connotation, but the basis or the foundation for those deep relationships was already there. So I think I appreciate that about what you said. Other folks.
But what you just said, I feel, Candace, I feel like leans into one of the things I sort of have been saying is like a hashtag get well to our organizations. Like, yeah, pandemic crisis, but we're actually, our organizations, our presenters, our dance field or performing arts ecology needs a get well process. And what that is the process of healing and getting right with the other crises that we've been dealing with. Why we keep replicating these models of tokenizing, why we keep replicating these models of white supremacy in our organizations, why our boards are all white, why our administrators are all white, and then we bring in at most experimental Black artists a year, or experimental Black, Indigenous, you know what I'm saying? Why we do that, why that is repeating itself. And part of that get well work is just as important as any from the inside out as organizations. And so how are white folks dealing with it, right? How are people of color coming to terms with the way that we've internalized the messages that we've been told about ourselves? And there are many folks that are committed to that work in this field, right? Urban Bushwoman has really been a major part of bringing folks together to get inside of that work with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And so I think that one of the things I just want to note is that part of that marathon that I propose that we are on, part of that urgency is that we're asking, when I say we, because I'm a part of a collective, I'm a part of a quilt of folks who work and think and are like-minded in our processes, we're asking presenters, organizations in the field, what is not just, I don't want to just read your document, I want to understand your practices, I want to understand your thinking. I don't want to go back into this hamster wheel of being that single artist. As an artist who's done well at that, I will say, as an artist who's been a beneficiary of that, I still move forward looking at the eventual end of my term from that time. And so I think that's part of what I just want to put that out there, that while we're looking at how do we recover quickly from the touring, I'm also asking our organizations, both white-led organizations and Black-led organizations, to let's also do the work of getting well.
Yeah.
I think that's right. The only thing I would add to that, because, from a scale standpoint, DTH is what I would consider a medium size, particularly, relative to, our counterparts, Ailey and ABT and some of these other folks, is, I think what's also showing up, because I totally agree with you, Marjani, and DTH has also been a beneficiary of this sort of segmentation that happens. I was having this fabulous conversation with our artistic director, Virginia Johnson, and she was sharing with me a conversation that she'd had with a colleague who expressed that we were sort of swinging in this other direction, and now he couldn't get presented because he didn't have any Black dancers in his company. And Virginia and I were sort of chuckling. I said, well, we have done with years of hearing from presenters that, I've already booked my Black company for the season, or, we can only get booked in, February for Black History Month. And so, we've, you're absolutely right. There's a wellness, there's a healing. There are some deep conversations about how, we have been perpetrating these systems, and we have been existing in these systems for so long that we don't even know how to extricate ourselves from these conversations. The flip side of that too, from DTH's perspective, and I want to speak on behalf of some of the mid-size companies, and probably be just, you know, us and Ballet Hispanico really out there. But, you know, we are so handcuffed to the income, right? It is like what we're really ultimately asking is that we need to extricate ourselves from this model so that we can actually be free to do and to reinvent this new world, right? If you're an organization like DTH, that kind of scares the shit out of me, frankly, because, you know, how I have my weeks and how I pay my dancers is based on how many weeks of touring I have, right? Like we don't have a cash reserve. We don't have an endowment. You know, it is cash in, cash out for us. And so, you know, while this reset button is exciting, it is also scary. And it also sort of speaks to the inequities that exist for organizations like DTH and Ballet Hispanico and Urban Bushwomen, frankly, where we have always been under-resourced to begin with. And so this conversation is also going to require us to really think about what does investment in artists mean? What does investment, you know, in art organizations that look like DTH, what does that mean? What are the relationships with the presenting community? You know, touring was an economic, you know, yes, it was about bringing the arts to community. I will not dismiss that. And certainly it is ingrained in DTH's mission. It's why we can be performing in Macon, Georgia at the same time as we're in Atlanta, Georgia. However, it was an economic mechanism, right? And in all economic mechanisms, there is supply and there is demand, right? We still live within a capitalist system. And so even with us reinventing that, there are structures that we're going to have to continue fighting against as a collective. And it is going to impact some organizations more so than others. There are some organizations that are going to financially be able to deal with what's the word? Oh my gosh, I can't even think. The floor shifting, right? Because we're going to be shifting. There's going to be a lot of movement. And some of us have cash reserves and endowments that we can sort of bump with that a little bit. And some of us don't, you know? And so I think that also has to be a part of this conversation when we are talking about let's change this model. I'm all for that because this model doesn't work and I don't want to be dependent upon this income. And it is going to be a minute for me to get DTH to a place where that doesn't, you know, I can roll with the punches, right? And so that's also just something that I want to call forth that, you know, for some of us, and I think it's that mid-range, it's going to be a little bit harder to be nimble in this conversation.
Yeah. I use Nutcracker as a metaphor. How can your ballet company live without its Nutcracker? How can your institution live without whatever its Nutcracker is? I have to say what really resonated with me, Candace, when you opened was that comment, touring is a closed network of privileged relationships. Like, oh, wow, wrote that down. And my tagline for that is, yes, based on the undervalued, underpaid labor of artists. And that's why it doesn't work. Touring has not, in general, truly been profitable. It hasn't worked for a long time. Artists are not being paid a living wage, unless maybe you're a commercial artist performing on Broadway 52 weeks out of the year. Touring fees don't even begin to represent the true cost of the creation process and what goes into that. We need 100 times more funding than we already have because we can't increase our ticket prices anymore. And in the global market of things, the US artists, which is grossly underfunded, completely undersupported, they cannot compete with the international market. So all of these are huge challenges on the US artist. So the construct doesn't work. So what is the total rethinking on how we do this? And, you know, I'm sorry, we have to start with universal wage. Why don't we just start there?
Yep. So we have a question from Meredith Bajia for Anna and Marjani. Are there funding models that would allow more creative models or extricated models? What reserve would be required for the interim before such a model could be implemented? And before we answer, since we're on the landing phase of our engagement, I think we should just start throwing out this idea of what you replace the word touring with engagement model look like. What is our dream for what this could be, right? So we're not thinking about the practical aspects. I know the money is an issue. I know our livelihoods are an issue, but what is this dream that we think could be possible?
Well, to piggyback on what Laura is saying, when I was sort of thinking about how would I approach this, right? There's got to be a world where I am not dependent upon giving my dancers a salary for a year that's based on touring, right? That's where it's problematic, is that the only way for me to be able to compensate my company members is if I have them on the road. How we are approaching this upcoming year is that we have our dancers are our instructors in our school. They are overseeing all of our community engagement and online programming. They are taking, those roles. Now, what that meant was that I had to let go of some stellar faculty members in order to hold on to my company members. That should never be a decision that I have to make in order for this organization to survive, but I did have to do that. We have to find another way for us to be able to sustain our work. My
dream for a second, but what could it be? Tell me. I don't know. Like, let's dream.
Really, if it was, look, our federal government should be stepping up and supporting the arts. I think that there's that. I think I've been shocked by the lack of knowledge and understanding at both the federal and state level. Cuomo's doing an awesome job with COVID, but I'm gonna tell you, some of these conversations that are happening about arts and culture, I'm like, do you even know what we do? No, you don't. And so, I think that we are paying so much in tax dollars, particularly if you live in New York City and New York State. How about our tax dollars actually support the arts and culture? I wish, Candace, I had some brilliant idea, but I know what's missing, or what I need to do is I need to extricate the compensation of my dancers from touring. That is first and foremost. That I have to figure out. I don't know the answer to how I make that happen. But that is the only way that I don't get locked into this model, into this what did you call it, Marjani? The hamster wheel that we are on, that we are so dependent upon these systems. And, listen, I had a conversation earlier today where I was like, I think, we can do well in touring. And I'm still replicating these bad, this nonsense, right? But I'm like, I think we could probably do well this year, Conversations are swinging our way. Maybe this is a year where we're not getting pitted against another Black dance company, right? But even that, right, that's not the world that we want either, to Marjani's point. That actually is not what we want either. So I think that's the first piece is, I have to extricate from DTH our necessity on needing touring income. I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out.
Okay. Other dreams. What could it be?
Dreams. I'm gonna focus on the dreams. And I'm gonna say, Anna, I would never chastise another Black organization for the way we learned to jump through these hoops. You best know I would never, because we have learned, right, how to jump through these hoops, all the while, being like PSAP says, critical lovers of the institutions and organizations that we're a part of. In terms of the dreams, I will say, I mentioned Art and Power, and I'm going to do a shameless plug on that, Joan. Again, look, Philly people, anyway, I'm going to just do a little plug on that, because one of the things that we realized for our work, myself and Everett Saunders, is how important cross-sector is going to be to our perpetuity as artists. That several years ago, we dove into a work I ended up calling a Being Here trilogy, because I realized it wasn't something I could do in one project, but that was looking at the intersections of mental illness and, you know, co-occurring conditions and addiction in the bodies of Black and brown folks, of systemically marginalized people in the US. And that sent me in conversation with the National Alliance of Mental Illness, with Dr. Carl Hart at Columbia University, right? And with the Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health at Perch. It sent me in all of these directions where folks were asking, how can we tell these stories? And now, as we're looking at our new work, A Prophet's Tale, I'm resourcing this book, which is by, you know, Daniel Martin Diaz, an incredible visual artist. But the person who wrote this forward is from an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley, a think tank, a 50-year-old think tank that is asking about the futures in Silicon Valley. My artistic family, we have to be cross-sector in our thinking about how important artists are to, as you say, as we've said, Laura, creating new futures, that we can shape our future, in the words of Adrienne Maree Brown. In fact, we always do. And so our ability to name that, and in our advocacy, Laura, like hold our institutions, our governments, our politicians, not just accountable to funding the arts, but to integrating the arts into our education systems, into all of our sectors, then we'll understand a little bit better how we can also be anti-racist in our practice and begin to understand and learn from the practices of cultural ancestral communities who know how to deal with this environment, who know how to deal with the earth, who know how to deal with the weather and the cosmos. Then we can really start becoming, like, elevating our humanity that integrates both our creative minds and our logistical minds in these processes. So I'm vouching for cross-sector engagement. That's what it is that I'm looking at for how we move forward in terms of a dream.
Thank you. Thank you. We're kind of like in our last comments. So Lane and Laura. Dream.
You know, I think salaries, I think we're just too simplistic in the way that we structure our relationships. And so I think we need to bring more resources to bear. I think in order to do that, we're going to have to do less and then kind of intensify and refocus on what it is we're actually doing and look for deeper kinds of engagements. It's funny, I used to scrutinize what multi-year commitments to an artist look like. I always felt like when artists would talk about it, it was sort of a ploy to, like, yeah, give me a multi-year commitment. But, you know, if you think about that, if an artist can have 3 to 5 years of a base salary, think about what they might be able to do if they're not as worried about where that portion of a salary or a full salary is actually going to come from. So I've been focused a lot on that. I also think theaters are, this is my plug for creating more accessibility, not just in the sort of equity and inclusivity work, but also just in the technology itself. Theaters are imperfect technology. They're sacred. They allow a live experience to be transacted or transmitted, but there are very few institutions around the country that reach people. So when work does tour, it actually reaches very few people. And so I think we owe it to ourselves when technology is relatively cheap and plentiful and high fidelity to use it to create better access.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, here. When Creating New Futures was trying to give itself a title, the word reinvention was used, and I shot an email to Janir Castro, who was our gentle guider, and I said, reinventing is an awfully big word. To me, reinventing this live performing arts world of ours, specifically in the US, would include dismantling our current, essentially non-existent funding framework, providing all artists with a universal wage, housing, healthcare, and a pension, eliminating paid ticketing, putting the artists in charge of all curation and programming. That, to me, is a reinvention of the current system. So, you know, that's what, and I know to us US born people that universal wage is some like weird idea. But just imagine how that would solve Anna's problem in a heartbeat. It would solve a lot of my, you know, it would solve so many ethical issues. It would just solve so much. And I know it really sounds so wild and far out, but you know, so did having Obamacare, frankly, you know, when we tackled that.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. I think we're at the end. Let's just go around and maybe give like 3 words to close us with. 3 words. 1, 2, or 3. Yeah, just keep it short. Your last thoughts that you want to share with us.
I'm going to say collective mindful urgency. Thank you, Lane, Marjani, and Anna for that.
Go for it, Marjani.
Susu models collective ideation.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I think it's action. Proof is in the pudding.
That's a good one, Lane. All right, well here, I'm gonna be really, you know, simplistic right now. Laura, Lane, Marjani, thank you all. You have inspired me. You have invigorated me to keep the fight, you know, despite my pessimism. I'm going to take your enthusiasm, your optimism, and I am going to build and create. And I look forward to more of these conversations and building together. Reinvention.
Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone, for everything that you shared. I'm just like reiterating some of the dreams that you offered us. Cross-sector collaboration and integration into larger and different systems, less and deeper relationships in our institutions, Lane, that you offered, and enhancing our use of technology to reach more people, extricate ourselves from these economic models, and then, of course, Laura closing us out with universal wage, doing away with paid tickets, and putting the artist in charge and keeping the artist central. So thank you for everything that you shared in this conversation. Thank you to our wonderful audience for tuning in for yet another week. We are at conversation 9 of the 12 that we're doing for this series. So I'm going to introduce just what we will be talking about next Tuesday, where Sydney Skybetter is going to be moderating a conversation on a digital future for the arts, which we talked a little bit about today, but they're going to dive really deep into that conversation with Andre Zachary, Ashley Farrow-Murray, and Gabor Krista. And please note that today's conversation will, as Alexia said in the beginning, will live on our Facebook page, and you can find it if you go to where our videos are listed. And we will share any resources that were shared in the comments or that our speakers mentioned in the event page on Facebook, but also on the event page on our website. If you tuned in today, please fill out our post-event survey so we can know what really excited you about today's event and if you have any suggestions for us for the future. I want to thank our friends at Elsie Interpreting Services and Viscardi Center for the accessibility services that they have provided. Clara and Brandon, you folks rock. Thank you for joining us for yet another week. And of course, thank you to our staff here at Dance MIC for really being team players to help us keep this series going for these 9 weeks and for the next 3 that we have to offer. All right, New York Dance, have a good night. I'll see you all next Tuesday. These 9 weeks and for the next Hello, everyone. We're still here. Brenda's going to bring back your videos just so that we can close out. Oh, mine's back already. Great. Okay, just waiting on Laura. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. I hope that was okay. You want to share any final thoughts amongst us?
Candace,
Well-
I totally forgot to talk about our model of satellite residencies, which is how we're keeping artists at work, how we're keeping ourselves at work. We've been working with our commissioners and things to do. So, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. If you have something written about it somewhere on our website, we can also share it.
Okay, I'll send it to you right away.
Cool. Awesome. Yep.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to the Dance NYC people. Really, you guys have done a remarkable job putting this framework together. And oh my God, the ACL folks, I spoke way too quick. I am so sorry. That is like a bunch of New Yorkers talking a mile a minute, huh?
Well, I'll also say, this is Brandon here, one of the ASL interpreters, that I don't really have to sign anymore. But it was wonderful to watch your guys' body language, just because we can interpret for so many people, politicians, whomever, but when it's dancers, it's like, especially when Anna was like, what's the word? What's the word? Like, yes, DTA. It just feels nice to be with other dancers and keeping the hope alive for the past, like 9 months, and then it'll be, 9 weeks, but 12 weeks, but hopefully we keep something like this going because it's super important and we learn alongside you. So thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Brenda.
good.
Yeah.
Sweet. Lane, any final thoughts?
No, I just feel very honored to be part of the conversation. You guys are all so articulate, and yeah, I got a lot out of it.
Thank you.
It was great.
If there's anything, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
No, I was just going to say it was wonderful, and I'm really inspired by just hearing you all in your perspective. So I hope, Laura, I'm gonna hold you to it. We got to get it together because
honey,
what is going on here?
Lane, I heard you. I heard you loud and clear. I don't know how that national conversation works, but damn it, it has to. We're gonna have to figure it out, or we're gonna make ourselves extinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are.
So we will do it. Yeah. It's been so wonderful to be in community with all of you. Thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you.
So grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there's anything like Marjani is going to share, if there's anything you want me to share with our audience, we always send in the next week's email, we put resources from the previous week. So if there's links or connections to other material you want me to share, just send it to me and I can add it to that. That's cute. But have a good night and thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, sorry.